The damp, chilly summer morning of 2010 began with an unusual commotion on a seaside street in Portland, Maine. 3 unmarked police cars quietly pulled up in front of a small nursing home where the second-floor windows still cast a faint golden light. Neighbors peeked through curtains as investigators in coats hurried down the tiled hallway, clutching thick files stamped with timestamps. Inside, Lori Vale, 74 years old, was brewing her morning tea. A habit she had maintained for decades, as if it were her way of staying calm after a past filled with loss. A rapid knock echoed at 7:32 a.m. Miss Lori Vale, Windsor County Police. We have a warrant for your arrest in connection with the disappearance of Tessa and Jacob Vale in 1963. An officer later recounted that the elderly woman's hand trembled slightly as she set down her teacup, but her eyes remained eerily calm, as if she had been waiting for this moment for 47 years. Before diving deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. On an autumn morning in 1963, Woodstock, Vermont, was draped in the characteristic tranquility of the American Northeast. The maple leaves had begun to turn, covering the gravel road leading into a small riverside neighborhood with a layer of damp gold. In the white-painted wooden house at the end of River Road, Lori Vale prepared breakfast as she did every day, steam rising from the coffee on the table, charred toast on the side, the radio playing local news. Her daughter, Tessa Vale, 16 years old, was putting on her favorite red wool coat, while Jacob J.J. Vale, 7 years old, insisted on bringing his little green toy truck. According to neighbors, around 7:30 a.m., they saw Tessa leading her brother out to the porch, laughing and saying something to their mother before the two disappeared from sight. That was the last time anyone saw the children alive. Around noon, a friend of Lori's stopped by, but didn't see the kids. Lori seemed calm, saying that Tessa took her brother to a friend's house to play. Everything seemed normal until afternoon fell, the sky turned cold, and shadows crept into the trees outside the window. Tessa's coat was still on the hook, JJ's shoes still under the staircase. Lori began to feel uneasy. She walked around the house calling the children's names, out to the backyard, where the swing swayed gently in the wind, but there was no response. When she returned to the kitchen, she realized the back door was wide open, the dining table uncleared, JJ's half-full glass of milk still there, and the radio silent. A chilling sensation ran down her spine. There were no footprints on the damp path, no sound of a car, no sign that the two children had left the house. Before dusk, Lori called her brother, Alexander Vale, who lived a few blocks away. The siblings shone flashlights around the garden, along the riverbank. The crunch of dry leaves under their feet mingled with the wind whistling through the roof, and in that moment, fear began to take shape. They found JJ's toy truck under a maple tree, its wheel broken, covered in a thin layer of dew. Otherwise, nothing. At 9 p.m., with the sky completely dark, Alexander said, "We have to call the police." Lori nodded shakily, clutching Tessa's wool scarf like a lifeline. At the Woodstock police station, the desk sergeant took the call at 9:17 p.m. Lori's voice was hoarse. "My 2 children are gone." 3 minutes later, the first patrol car with flashing red lights sped into the thick fog enveloping River Road. The lights swept across the trees, reflecting off the half-open glass door of the wooden house, where the wind stirred the thin white curtains like a breath. In that cold kitchen, the wall clock ticked steadily, and the unfinished breakfast remained intact. Patrol cars arrived at River Road just minutes after Lori Vale's report. The Vermont night sky seemed swallowed by thick fog, red lights flashing off the wet, cold trunks of trees. Woodstock's police chief, Harold Benton, stepped out of his car, his thick coat soaked with mist, a worn leather notebook in hand. He surveyed the small wooden house, back door still open, kitchen light on, the air heavy enough to cut with a knife. "Are you sure they didn't go anywhere?" he asked Lori. The woman shook her head, her eyes sunken with panic. "No, they would never leave here without telling me." Benton ordered the area sealed off. 2 other officers were dispatched for support, bringing K-9 unit dogs from Montpellier, over 30 miles away. Flashlights swept through every bush, cold beams piercing the thin mist. The night wind carried the musty scent of forest soil and moisture from the Ottauquechee River, flowing behind the house. Each step on the wet grass made a soft sound, and no one spoke a word. Around midnight, a second search team was formed. One group swept along the riverbank, another delved deeper into the pine woods. Benton held a bullhorn, calling the children's names loudly, his voice echoing far before dissolving into the fog. No response came, only the trickle of water and the wind sweeping over the tin roof. The tracking dogs sniffed along the fence line, pausing occasionally with a low whine before moving on. Near the base of a large maple tree, an officer spotted something faintly gleaming under the light. It was Tessa's red wool scarf, caught on a low branch, damp and frosted. Lori recognized it immediately, clutching it until her knuckles turned white, but said nothing. A few meters away, another officer bent down to pick up the small toy truck, its green paint chipped, the one JJ always carried. Those two items were the only traces. By dawn, the area around the Vale house had become a maze of lights and calls. A small Vermont State Police helicopter was dispatched from Burlington, hovering over Woodstock with spotlights, sweeping the river and the Marsh Billings Rockefeller Forest. Benton directed the setup of a temporary checkpoint at the Vale house, using topographic maps to divide search zones. He ordered every footprint, tire track, and sign, no matter how small, to be documented. But the sky began to drizzle, then pour heavily. Within hours, the first mud marks dissolved. As dawn broke, mist swirled over the valley, exhaustion etched on every face. No bodies, no clues to their direction, only a cold void remained between the house and the forest behind it. Benton wrote in his first report, 2 children missing, no signs of forced entry. Search area 5-mile radius. Evidence, wool scarf, toy truck. Status, undetermined. News spread quickly across Windsor County within hours. The local radio station in Rutland aired a special bulletin, 2 children in Woodstock vanish without a trace. Authorities mobilizing full resources. The next morning, the Burlington Free Press ran a bold headline, Vermont Forest Swallows Children. Entire town searches. Residents flocked to help, bringing flashlights, warm blankets, food for the rescue team. Local farmers combed row by row through the trees, poking sticks into the underbrush. Someone reported seeing tracks from an old truck near an eastern dirt road, but by the time police arrived, the rain had washed everything away. On the second afternoon, the search expanded to a 10-mile radius. A long line of police cars, pickup trucks, and volunteers strung out along the dirt road. Helicopters continued circling, but Vermont's dense forest turned the light into pale white patches amid a sea of trees. A few speculated kidnapping, but Benton wouldn't confirm anything. He only said, "We won't stop until we find the kids." That evening, Lori sat on the front steps, still clutching her daughter's wool scarf. Lights flickered inside the house, police standing watch outside. Alexander Vale paced the yard, silent and tense, his eyes avoiding contact with anyone. An officer noted that detail in his notebook but said nothing. In the report sent to State Police Headquarters, Benton ended the final line with a short note, "Case likely to prolong, no signs of life detected yet." Severity high. 3 days later, the search expanded to 2 neighboring counties, but all efforts were in vain. The wool scarf and JJ's toy became the only symbols of lingering hope. On the third evening, as unseasonal sleet began to fall, Benton gazed out at the dark forest in the distance and knew the children's chances of survival were nearly zero. He ordered the search scaled back that night, and the case shifted to criminal investigation. From that moment, Woodstock was no longer a peaceful town in the mist. It was the place where the Vale children had vanished, leaving no trace behind. The next morning, as sunlight pierced the thick fog blanketing Woodstock, the Vermont State Police Criminal Investigation Team arrived at River Road. The search had paused at 3 a.m. the previous night, due to early season sleet, making the dirt road slippery. Everyone hoped the morning would bring something new, but instead, they faced a eerily silent scene. The Vale family's wooden house stood motionless against a gray sky, no smoke rising from the chimney since the children's disappearance. The lead investigator, Lieutenant Harold Benton, returned to the scene with 2 state forensic technicians. They carried cameras, evidence kits, and a manual measuring tape. Those simple tools were all they had in 1963. No DNA technology, no crime scene scanners. Everything relied on the human eye and experience. Lori Vale opened the door for them in silence. She was still wearing her bathrobe from the night before, her face gaunt, a trembling cup of coffee in hand. "I just want them home," she whispered. Benton nodded, instructing the technician to start the camera, photographing every room in full panorama. As soon as they stepped through the back door threshold, Benton crouched down. On the damp ground, a series of adult footprints were deeply imprinted in the mud, stretching from the steps to the open yard behind the house before vanishing at the edge of the wooden fence. He measured them, size 11. Far too large for Lori Vale, who wore size 7 shoes. "Someone walked here after last night's rain," Benton said quietly. The young officer noted it, sketching a diagram with a ruler. A few steps away they spotted a tire skid mark, as if a small truck had veered across the fence, leaving a 3-meter groove. A small piece of iron embedded in the mud was picked up and labeled evidence 03. As they moved into the backyard, dim light fell on a silver necklace with a broken chain half buried in the soil. Benton picked it up with tweezers, bagged it in nylon, and showed it to Lori. She gasped softly, "That's Tessa's. I gave it to her for her birthday last year." Benton's eyes narrowed. The chain was yanked apart, not naturally broken, indicating strong force. He signaled the technician to photograph it close up and collect the soil clinging to the links. Inside the house, the technicians moved carefully. They started in the living room, where the dining table still held 2 plates and an old glass of milk. One chair was pushed askew from its usual position. On the wooden floor, faint drag marks led toward the back door. On the kitchen counter, there were damp streaks as if someone had wiped hastily with a cloth. Benton touched them lightly, catching a faint whiff of old bleach. "Someone tried to clean something up here," he said, his gaze turning to Lori. She remained silent, head bowed. When checking Tessa's bedroom, they noticed the bedspread unusually smooth, no signs of a child having just slept there. The wooden dresser was left open, several clothes missing. Lori said, "Maybe she folded them and took them, but I don't know where." Benton didn't respond, just leaned in to examine the mirror by the door. On the frame, light reflected faintly, revealing a small dusty handprint, possibly JJ's or Tessa's, but overlaid above it was a larger handprint in some foreign substance, like mud or machine oil. He pointed it out, signaling the technician to lift the print. In the corner of the room, a small rug was folded over. When lifted, Benton discovered a small red fiber, similar to the material of the wool scarf found the night before. He noted it, bagged it as evidence. 09. Beneath the rug was a 40 centimeters long scratch on the floor, as if something heavy had been dragged across. No blood, but a faint patch of dried mud, dark brown. He used a razor blade to carefully collect a sample. By mid-morning, the team had numbered over 12 pieces of evidence: tire tracks, footprints, necklace, fiber, soil samples, handprints, iron shard, mud streaks, and even the milk glass with a child's lip mark. All were sealed in paper bags, labeled Case #6315, Vale missing. Benton had someone draft a crime scene diagram on graph paper, relative positions, pathways, evidence locations. Everything was done with pencil and straight edge, per 1960s protocol. Benton then stepped out to the porch, surveying the fence line. Last night's rain had washed away most traces, but he still spotted a broken piece of wood with tire marks over it. He called the officer in charge of records. "Check if anyone around here owns a gray truck." The officer replied, "Alexander Vale, Her brother has a 1952 Chevrolet, gray Vermont plate 6A734. Benton paused for a few seconds, then noted it. Before leaving, he returned to the kitchen. Early light through the window revealed a faint bright streak on the wall, as if something had hung there and been removed. On the counter, amid the haphazardly cleared clutter, he noticed a small scrap of paper, corner, torn, with scrawled handwriting in blue ink. "Don't let anyone know." A. Benton slipped the paper into a separate envelope, marked R, restricted. He said nothing to Lori, just instructed the two technicians to lock the door and seal the area. As he got into the car, he opened his notebook and wrote the final line of that morning. Scene shows signs of tampering. Multiple evidences match motorized activity truck. Large footprints do not match homeowner. Likelihood of disappearance involving criminal elements. Outside, snow began to fall lightly, gradually covering the mud marks just photographed. The white wooden house sank back into silence, as if children's laughter had never echoed there. Benton glanced in the rearview mirror, sensing something deeper, cold and wrong, lurking beneath that damp soil. The veiled disappearance was no longer a case of getting lost. It had become a crime. The small interrogation room was tucked behind the Woodstock police station. Dark wood-paneled walls, pale yellow light from a hanging bulb, reflecting off the cold metal table. Lori Vale sat silently, clutching a cooled cup of coffee, her shadowed eyes downcast. In front of her, Lieutenant Harold Benton opened his worn leather notebook, his voice steady. "Tell me about that morning, every detail. Start from when you woke up." Lori responded slowly, her voice trembling but controlled. She said she woke around 7. Prepared breakfast, then went to the bathroom for a few minutes. When she returned, the children were gone. "I thought they went for a walk around the house," she said. "Tessa often took her brother out to the porch in the mornings." Benton nodded, noting it. But when he asked if she heard any car sounds or unusual noises, Lori shook her head. "No, completely quiet." He paused for a few seconds, looking straight at her. "Did you see your brother that night?" Lori replied quickly. "No, I only called Alex after discovering they were gone." Benton showed no reaction, just added a few lines, then gently ended the first interview. At the same time, in the next room, Alexander Vale, the burly man with a rough face, his dark canvas jacket smelling of machine oil, leaned back in his chair, hands clasped across his chest. When the officer asked about the night of the disappearance, Alex said in a gravelly, slightly irritable voice, "I was home all evening. It wasn't until nearly midnight that Lori called saying the kids were nowhere, that I drove over." The officer pressed, "Did you leave the house before that?" Alex was silent for a few seconds, then sighed. "I stepped out for a bit, to dump some scrap. I've been cleaning out the garage these past few days." "What time did you leave?" "Around 11:30. "How long were you gone?" "About an hour." When asked what dumping meant, Alex answered vaguely, "Some odds and ends. Old tires, rotten wood." The investigator noted it, but in Benton's mind, that detail immediately linked to the tire skid and truck tracks they'd found that morning. By day's end, the two statements lay side by side on Benton's desk. The timelines matched suspiciously, both mentioned the phone call after 11 p.m. But Lori insisted she didn't know Alex had left the house before that, while Alex said he received the call near midnight. This left a nearly hour-and-a-half gap unexplained. That afternoon, Benton and another officer went to the houses east of River Road to interview civilian witnesses. Mrs. Margaret Doyle, an elderly woman living in a brick house across from the road leading into the woods, recounted that around midnight, she heard a truck engine rumbling through the fog. "I looked out the window," she said, "and saw headlights from an old gray truck shining through the trees. It turned around very slowly, then headed toward the main road." When Benton asked if she recognized the driver, she shook her head. "Too dark, but it was definitely an old vehicle, a 50s Chevrolet or Dodge. I remember the sound of their engines well." Benton thanked her and stepped out to the porch. The afternoon wind chilled through the bare trees. In his mind, the pieces began to fit. The skid marks, corresponding tire size, iron shard near the fence, all pointing to the truck Alexander was using. That evening, he returned to the station. Lori was waiting in the hallway, her face pale, whispering, "Do you think the kids are still alive?" Benton didn't answer directly, just said, "We'll do everything to find out what happened." As she left, he watched, noticing her trembling hands clutching her coat pocket, as if afraid to drop something. Before leaving the office, Benton called the state police outpost in Montpelier, requesting a recheck of Alexander Vale's vehicle registration, 1952 Chevrolet truck, gray plate 6, A734, matching the witness description exactly. The data confirmed it was legally registered, but there was no reason for it to be running near Lori's house at night. The next morning, he went back to see Alex, this time unannounced. Alex was washing his truck in the yard, exhaust still trailing black smoke. Benton approached, pointing to the mud still caked under the chassis. "Did you go anywhere that night?" "I told you, dumping scrap." "Where?" "The abandoned lot near the lake." "Did anyone go with you?" Alex looked down. "No. I went alone." Benton scanned around, his eyes lingering on a long scratch on the truck bed, with a thin red fiber caught on the door latch. He pulled on gloves, gently removing the fiber and placing it in a small plastic bag. "I need you to bring the truck to the station for a full technical exam," he said calmly. Alex didn't object, but his face tightened briefly. That evening, Benton wrote a single line in his personal notebook, not the official report. Timelines and words matched too artificially. "Feels like they coordinated the story before police arrived." The Vale disappearance, from being a tragedy of two children, was gradually turning into a puzzle within their own home. And with each new statement, faith in an accident receded further, making way for a hypothesis everyone feared to admit: the crime had begun right from inside the Vale family. The Vermont State Police Forensic Lab received all evidence collected from the Vale house early the next morning. The small basement room at the Montpelier station smelled of chemicals and metal, neon lights shining down on the steel table where sealed paper envelopes were neatly arranged. Mud samples, red fiber, silver necklace, iron shard, and a mud-clung cloth scrap from the kitchen floor. Chief Technician Edward Mills, who had worked many major cases in the region, carefully opened each package with a utility knife. He poured the mud sample onto a tray, picking through grains with tweezers, then peered through the optical microscope. Under the lens, the mud revealed shimmering streaks, the distinctive reflection of machine oil mixed with soil. "This isn't forest mud," Mills said to Lieutenant Benton, standing behind him. "Hydrocarbon traces, like the lubricant used in old trucks." Benton leaned in, his eyes hardening. "Same type as Alexander Vale's 1952 Chevrolet." Mills nodded, flipping through his notebook. "And the soil composition mixes small gravel particles, likely from the dirt road along the Ottauquechee lakefront, not the Vale yard. This mud was brought in from elsewhere." That result shifted the investigation's direction. Benton ordered a map of possible truck routes, using data points, tire tracks behind the house, the witness's account of hearing the vehicle at midnight, and the mud's geology. A route was drawn in red ink on the Vermont map, from the Vale house along River Road, veering onto a dirt path over a small bridge to Ottauquechee Lake, the exact direction witness Margaret Doyle described. "If Alexander was hauling something out, this is the easiest route," Benton said, his finger tapping the map lightly. At the same time, the forensics lab sent back the analysis results for the red fiber found in Tessa's room and on Alexander's truck. Under the microscope, the two fiber samples had the same twisted wool structure, dyed with synthetic dye code 401, a rare type only found in wool scarves produced at the Springfield Mill in 1960. Mills confirmed, "The two samples match completely. This is fiber from Tessa's scarf." Benton nodded slightly, feeling like the pieces were gradually fitting together. The broken silver necklace was also analyzed thoroughly. The break wasn't from oxidation or wear over time, but from a sudden yank with strong force, twisting the links. Under the light, the fractured weld gleamed, one side still clinging to a bit of light blue fabric, not matching the shirt Tessa wore that morning. Benton speculated it might have been pulled during a struggle or grabbed hard by someone as the girl tried to run. From those facts, he called a small meeting at the Woodstock Police Headquarters. A large map spread across the table, marked with red pins for areas to comb. We'll expand the search along the Otokoji lakefront, the eastern forest area, and the dirt road leading to the abandoned pumping station. If they hauled something heavy, they might have stopped nearby. The rescue team was mobilized again, this time with added state troopers and forest rangers for support. That afternoon, a line of pickup trucks carrying people and equipment pulled up at the forest entrance. Cold wind blew through the faded red maple canopies, dry leaves swirling across the ground. Benton led the way, followed by 2 officers and a tracking dog. Along the lake shore, murky water reflected the gray autumn sky. They found a child's brown glove, wet and mud-caked, about 20 yards from the water's edge. Not far away, in the underbrush, a beech nut candy wrapper, the kind JJ often ate, lay mixed in the soil. Both were collected and labeled as new evidence, but no bodies or human traces. As dusk fell, the team waded into a small marsh east of the lake. A young officer pointed to something floating near the bank. A girl's black shoe, rubber sole, drawstring intact. Lori Vale later confirmed it was Tessa's. Benton stared at the shoe bobbing on the water, half submerged, a chill running down his neck. He knew these items weren't random. They had been carried here from elsewhere. The Otokoji River's current was strong, capable of sweeping anything from upstream. Back at the Vale house that night, Benton eyed Alexander's truck still parked in the yard. Light rain fell, filling the old mud ruts with water. He stood still, hand on the cold hood, thinking about the route map and the scattered evidence, gradually pointing in the same direction. The children's items found carried no sign of life, only a silent reminder that somewhere around Woodstock, amid the maple woods and quiet lakeshore, something had happened that the Vale family didn't want anyone to know. And he decided that starting tomorrow, the search would no longer be for the living, it would be to uncover the truth. Lieutenant Harold Benton returned to his Woodstock office on a bitterly cold morning, frost blanketing the foggy window panes. On his desk were dozens of notes, maps, crime scene photos, and a carefully numbered evidence list. He lit a cigarette, opened the file, marked Vale case hash 6315, and began rearranging the entire timeline, what he believed would reveal something still hidden to this point. According to witness statements and confirmed facts, the last time anyone saw the 2 children was at 7:30 a.m. when Tessa and JJ stood on the porch with their mother. After that, no one on River Road saw them again. Lori said she went inside to prepare breakfast, then returned to find the kids gone. Assuming her statement was true, the blank period began at 7:35 a.m. Benton marked the milestones, 7:30 a.m. Neighbors saw the 2 children on the porch, 7:40, 8 o'clock. Lori stated she was inside the house, heard nothing unusual, 8:15. A witness passing by saw the Vale house door open, radio on but no one in the yard, 9:30. Lori said she discovered the kids missing, 10 o'clock, called a close friend to ask if Tessa had come over. From 7:30 to 10 o'clock a.m., 2.5 hours completely blank, with no independent witnesses confirming Lori's location. That was the lost window. In the investigation log, Benton added another column. Suspicious timing, the previous night. According to Alexander Vale's statement, he left his house at 11:30 p.m. to dump scrap. Lori claimed she didn't know about it, but witness Margaret Doyle heard a truck leaving River Road near midnight, and the vehicle she described matched Alexander's 1952 Chevrolet. The tire tracks found behind the Vale house had a wheelbase corresponding to that model. When cross-referenced, Benton realized 2 suspicious markers running parallel, 11:30 p.m. the night before and 7:30 a.m., both circling the Vale property, both tied to family members. He circled Alexander Vale's name in the persons of interest list. Next to it he added, another, Charles Day. The man who had been around Lori in recent months. Charles was an amateur writer involved in the local church's religious discussion group. A few townsfolk said they'd seen Charles at the Vale house, often when Martin, Lori's husband, was still alive. After Martin's death and an industrial accident 2 years prior, Charles appeared more frequently, helping Lori with odd jobs. Benton had no evidence tying Charles to the disappearance yet, but the evening visits caught his attention. That afternoon, Benton met with Lori again. She greeted him with an eerily calm demeanor. No tears, no pleas, no panicked expressions like those of other parents in disappearances he'd witnessed. When Benton mentioned Charles Day, her eyes just blinked slightly. "He's a good man, often read the Bible with me and the kids. Was he here the day the children vanished?" "No, I didn't see him that day." The answer was so smooth it felt unnatural to Benton. In his office, he flipped through the crime scene photos again. Tire tracks, large footprints, yanked necklace, red fiber, all pointed to adult intervention. Yet aside from Alexander and Lori, no one showed signs of being on the property that morning. If they hid bodies, they needed a vehicle, Benton thought. If a vehicle, only the truck. And if a truck, Alexander was the only one driving it. Benton requested a thorough check of Alexander's Chevrolet truck. Preliminary results from the lab showed mud mixed with machine oil residue in the bed, identical to samples from the Vale house. A small streak of red paint clung inside the bed, possibly from wool, matching Tessa's scarf color. However, in 1963, such analyses weren't yet admissible as legal evidence. No blood, no bodies, everything remained speculation. A week passed, the search yielding nothing. Continuous rain and snow made tracking nearly impossible. The order to suspend the search was issued. Benton sat in his office, staring at the stacked files. Each line felt heavier. No witnesses, no bodies, no identified perpetrator. He opened the note he'd kept separate, the scrap found in the Vale house, the scrawled line, "Don't let anyone know. EA, could be Alexander or someone else." But if he had nothing but guesses, the case would have to be closed. On the last day of October, the Vale missing case #6315 file was transferred to the Windsor County Police Office. On the cover, Benton's short note stood like a surrender from the entire investigation. Missing. Unresolved. As he filed the folder into the steel cabinet, snow began falling heavily outside. Inside the office, only the scratch of his pen and the weary breath of an investigator who knew that somewhere in those 7:30 to 10 a.m. gaps that morning, the truth had been buried, along with the 2 Vale children, and perhaps the conscience of the family itself. 1964 passed in heavy silence. After the official search ended, the small wooden house on River Road stood empty. Weeds grew tall to the windows, the white curtains once swaying in the wind, now thick with dust. Occasionally, town kids passing by would point and whisper about the house where the 2 children vanished, then hurry away. No one asked about the Vale case anymore. Woodstock life went on, but in the minds of those who witnessed it, the story remained an unhealed scar. Early in 1965, news spread across Windsor County that Alexander Vale had died of a stroke. He was found in his home, half-empty bottle of whiskey and cigarette pack still on the table. The medical report noted natural causes. No autopsy. No one questioned it. Lieutenant Harold Benton, by then transferred to Burlington, learned of it only through a small newspaper blurb. He folded the paper, smoking quietly in the rain. Deep down, he knew the Vale case ended as most unresolved files do. No answers, no justice, just a thin stack of papers gradually forgotten. After Alexander's death, Lori Vale sold the house cheaply and left Vermont. She was said to have moved to Maine, living with distant relatives on the Portland coast. No one in town heard from her again. With time, the Vale name faded from conversations. By the late 1970s, Woodstock had changed, paved roads, tourists coming for the fall foliage, and no one mentioning the 2 children who once vanished there. The Vale file was transferred to the Windsor County Police Office archives. a damp basement with peeling brick walls, where hundreds of old cases sat in stacked cardboard boxes. Each box labeled in marker, year, case name, status. On the Vale box, the scrawled words read, 1963. Vale missing, unresolved. Inside were a few yellowed black and white photos, faded note scraps, and Benton's final report, paper corner rusted from an old staple. Crime scene images were nearly blurred, tire tracks reduced to faint smudges, the silver necklace a dim glint on the soil. Decades passed, Vermont changed. Investigation technology advanced. But the Vale case lay dormant in the shadows. Each year, when archivists cleaned the storage, they dusted the box and returned it to the shelf. No one opened it. No one inquired. Those who knew the story gradually passed away, and Woodstock was left with only a vague legend of the two children in the woods. Then time rolled to 2009. A statewide archive inventory was conducted. Old cases, long forgotten, were pulled for reclassification. When the archivist touched the veiled missing, unresolved box, dust billowed thickly. In that moment, no one knew that just a year later, from this very moldy file, a new investigation would be reignited, and Vermont would confront a past they thought buried nearly half a century ago. In March 2010, snow in Woodstock melted earlier than usual. The ground around was soft and damp, and the new owners of the old Charles Day property, a young couple from Burlington, decided to renovate the backyard to dig a new well. The plot was just a few miles from River Road, surrounded by old pine woods and moss-covered rocks. They hired a local construction crew with a backhoe. That morning, the sky was silver gray, the backhoe's roar echoing through the quiet space, mingling with the scent of damp spring soil. As the steel bucket first touched the old soil behind the abandoned horse barn, the operator heard an odd clunk, not like stone. He stopped the machine, climbed down, and shoveled away some mud. Beneath the waterlogged earth, a square concrete slab emerged, about 10 inches thick, framed in wood. "Looks like an old foundation," he said, tapping it. The sound was hollow, eerie. When they pried up one corner of the concrete, a sharp, acrid smell escaped. Something anyone who's worked in damp cellars knew: aged earth. And something once burned. One of the workers grimaced. "There's something here, like bones." The owner hurriedly called local authorities. Less than an hour later, Windsor County Police arrived. The first responding officer was Ryan McCleary, who had been on the crime scene unit for ancient grave exhumations. When he shone his light into the pit, the beam reflected off a shiny metal object amid black ash. He bent down and picked it up with tweezers, a silver necklace fragment, engraved with TV. Small, delicate letters but clear. McCleary stood frozen for seconds in his mind. Those two initials immediately evoked a disappearance he'd heard about in Police Academy. Tessa Vale, 1963. The area was sealed off immediately. A forensics team from Montpelier arrived that afternoon, bringing field tents, lighting equipment, and sample preservation bags. As more earth was cleared, lights revealed ivory bone fragments mingled with ash and black soil, not intact, but clearly human. Nearby, a small tarnished silver bracelet was found, chain nearly broken, engraved, JJ, faded, almost illegible by time. A technician whispered, "Children." They continued the meticulous excavation layer by layer. Amid the bone fragments were charred fabric scraps, gray-black, smelling of old smoke and gasoline. One scrap still held crude stitching, seemingly from a wool coat or scarf. No one spoke much, only the steady scrape of earth and the soft note-taking of the technician. At the pit's edge, the young landowner stood huddled, face ashen. He whispered to an officer, "Could it be that disappearance?" The other nodded slightly, saying nothing. Night fell, the scene lit by high-powered lamps. Wind from the Otokichi River brought chill fluttering the nylon covers. Bone samples and evidence were placed in separate boxes, numbered sequentially, but no one there needed a report to know what they stood before. Everyone felt the same thing. They had just touched a secret buried nearly half a century. When the final layer was removed, a rectangular pit over a meter deep appeared, bottom lined with rotted wood like a crude coffin frame. One wood corner charred, stained with aged gasoline. McCleary stood at the pit's edge, flashlight in hand, beam catching the remains of a metal barrette, rusted but still recognizable, with a small flower shape at the end. He said nothing, just turned to his colleague. "Call the chief investigator's office. They need to know the Vale case just came back to life." News spread quickly within police circles. The next morning, the property was cordoned with yellow tape. "Do not cross" signs at the gate. Woodstock locals passing by stopped, murmuring. Many elders recognized the address. It had once been Charles Day's home, Lori Vale's old acquaintance, the woman whose 2 children vanished without a trace. In the next day's Burlington Free Press, the headline was succinct: "Woodstock Dig, Suspected Link to 1963 Disappearance." In the Windsor County Archives office, the moldy cardboard box labeled "Vale Bell Missing, Unresolved" was pulled from the shelf for the first time in nearly 50 years. The archivist blew off the dust, placing it on the new investigation team's desk. The old black and white photos, ink-smeared notes, all reopened. Outside, Vermont's sky turned abruptly cold, spring rain falling lightly, veiling the ground where the relics had just been unearthed in a damp haze. After 47 years, the Vale case was no longer a forgotten tale in the files. It had returned, clear and concrete, and this time, the children buried long ago would finally speak through their own evidence. Lying deep under the silent soil, the whole town thought had rested forever. The bone samples were transported to the Vermont State Forensics Lab in Montpelier early the next morning. Outside, light drizzle fell, while inside, the examination room gleamed cold and quiet. Only the hum of dehumidifiers and rustle of evidence wrapping paper. On the stainless steel table, bone sample boxes were lined up straight, each numbered by excavation position. The scent of damp earth and old ash still lingered, mingling with disinfectant and medical alcohol. Dr. Caroline Hurst, head of the State Forensics Unit, opened the first box lid. She lifted small bone fragments onto a white enamel tray, eyes behind round glasses focused intently. "Female pelvis, adolescent," she said softly. "Epiphyseal lines not fully fused." Next was the second box, with smaller bones, slender leg bones, a small skull, deciduous teeth partially shed. One male child, under 8. She looked up at her colleague, voice lowering. 2 individuals, one female, one male. These bone fragments, after cleaning and drying, underwent carbon-14 dating. Analysis results showed tritium decay levels consistent with specimens aged 45, 50 years, spot on for the early 1960s. Parallelly, the team conducted morphological comparison, femur length, tooth size, pelvic ratios. Based on that, they concluded the female victim was about 15, 17 years old, the male about 6'8". When this data reached the Windsor County investigation team, Lieutenant Ryan McCleary glanced at the results table for seconds before whispering, "Tessa and JJ." No more words needed. They immediately contacted Woodstock Clinic, where the Vale family's 1963 dental records were stored. Fortunately, though old, the dental X-rays remained in the paper archives, faded, but clear on distinctive features. Forensic odontologists compared the X-rays to the excavated teeth. The female victim had upper incisors slightly rotated left, matching the incisor rotation note in Tessa Vale's file. The male had a characteristic gap between front teeth, aligning with J.J. Vale's living photo. Caroline Hurst closed the file, stating succinctly, "Match." That word echoed in the lab like the end to 47 years of doubt. Each bone fragment was documented in detail, left femur cracked longitudinally, suggesting trauma or heavy impact pre-death. The child's arm bone showed light charring, indicating post-mortem burning. A small skull fragment from Tessa had a fine crack, possibly from a hard object impact. No doubt left, this wasn't accident or natural. It was murder. That afternoon, McCleary drove back to Woodstock, carrying the forensics report. Rain had stopped, afternoon fog rising thick over Old River Road. He pulled over at the road's end, gazing at the tree line where the Vale house once stood. That house now just brick foundation and rotted wall stubs. He stood a long time, imagining the 1963 morning scene when the two children vanished from the porch. At the Windsor County Police Office, an internal bulletin went out. Forensic analysis confirms identities of victims Tessa Vale, 16, and Jacob Vale, 7. Time of death, circa September 1963. Signs of external force intervention. File shifted from missing, unresolved, to homicide investigation. No noisy press conference, no TV cameras, just a quiet action. The small sign on the Vale file box replaced with a new label, handwritten in black ink, Vale case, homicide. In the lab, Caroline Hurst packed away the bone trays, gloved hands gently placing fragments into storage boxes. As the final lid closed, she glanced at the wall clock, the second hand ticking past exactly 5 p.m., nearly 50 years, and finally the kids have their names called right, she whispered. Outside the window, first snow of the season fell softly, quietly blanketing the parking lot like a white shroud. The Vale case, thought vanished with time, now officially lived again. This time, no longer a tale of disappearance, but a full murder investigation. 1 week after the forensic results were announced, the Windsor County investigation team returned to the scene on the outskirts of Woodstock. The spring rain had softened the ground further, facilitating deeper subsurface surveys. This time, they brought equipment that hadn't existed in Vermont in 1963, GPR, ground-penetrating radar. Under the overcast sky, electromagnetic cables were stretched across the plot, sensors beginning to emit signals into the earth. Ultrasonic waves scanning through the damp soil layer by layer. The engineer in charge of the device, Elliot Gaines, adjusted the control panel mounted on the all-terrain vehicle. The small screen flickered, displaying response waves. He pointed to an area showing an unusual dark depression, about 15 meters east of the initial excavation pit, near the old horse barn foundation. There's something at about 1.5 meters deep, he said, an empty cavity with density different from the natural soil. Lieutenant Ryan McCleary nodded. Dig there, layer by layer. The first shovelfuls of earth were scraped away, releasing a musty scent of old soil. At nearly 2 meters deep, the shovel blade hit something hard. The worker bent down, brushing aside the dirt, revealing a streak of black ash and charred fabric scraps, identical to the materials recovered from the first pit. The ash lay thick, mixed with wood splinters, indicating a large fire burned in an enclosed space. Below, the forensics team found a curved iron shell, possibly a fuel tank frame or old gasoline container. A half-burned wool scrap still retained its dark red color in the unignited corner. The deeper they dug, the more strange details emerged. A strand of long light brown hair caught in the wet soil layer. McCleary carefully picked it up with tweezers and placed it in a glass vial. Nearby, a technician discovered a patch of pale yellow sticky substance at the pit bottom, thick and glossy. They scraped a sample and sent it to the lab for analysis. Elliot, after observing, said quietly, "Could be industrial adhesive or sealant used to seal or conceal something." As they expanded the surrounding area, the GPR map revealed multiple abnormally compacted soil zones forming a semicircle, a pattern of artificial stratigraphy often seen in intentional burials. Each spot was marked with plastic stakes and numbered. A 1963 satellite map of the property was brought out for comparison. McCleary spread the faded map across the vehicle hood, its lines showing the plot once had a wooden horse barn built and used by Alexander Vale before his death. He had the tools and means to dig and bury something here, McCleary said. He could even have used the barn as cover, no one would notice. Police collected soil samples at 3 different depths, from the top ash layer to the underlying natural soil, for chemical composition comparison. Preliminary on-site results showed unusually high hydrocarbon levels, consistent with motor oil and leaded gasoline common in the 1960s. This reinforced the hypothesis someone had burned evidence, possibly clothing, items, or even body parts, using vehicle fuel. then reburied it to erase traces. McCleary stood silently gazing into the pit, where the ash still faintly smoked under the dim sun. "Not an impulsive act," he said quietly. "This person knew how to conceal, chose the right spot and timing." Elliot looked around, pointing to the old maple row. "From here to the main road takes less than 3 minutes. If someone had a truck, they could come here in the middle of the night without anyone knowing." As dusk approached, they concluded the second excavation. All evidence was sealed: soil samples, hair, charred fabric, adhesive, iron shell, along with GPR radar images. In the sunset light, McCleary looked back at the plot now riddled with pits and surrounded by yellow tape. A chilling sensation crawled up his spine, because the place he stood had once been part of Alexander Vale's property. The man recorded simply as search support relative in the 1963 file. That night, in the field office set up right next to the plot, the tech team compiled preliminary results. The radar scan map clearly showed 2 burial pits with similar structures, spacing, depth, orientation. Both lay along a straight line extending toward the riverbank. McCleary stared at the display model, voice low. "If there are 2 pits, there might be a third." Elliot asked, "What do you think?" McCleary replied curtly, "One for evidence, one for people, and one for fear." The next day, when interim test results from the chemistry lab arrived, all suspicions were confirmed. The pale yellow adhesive was polychloroprene, industrial rubber cement, the same type commonly used in 1960s mechanic garages, and the long hair sample found in the second pit, after comparison with new DNA reference from Lori Vale's sample collected in Maine, matched completely. In silence, McCleary just folded the report shut. No need to say it aloud. Everyone understood. The perpetrator behind this hadn't just tried to hide bodies, but had prepared meticulously, calculating every layer of soil and gasoline scent, as if the entire plot had been built solely to cover a crime. The afternoon wind blew through the maple row, carrying the damp smoke scent of old ash, and in that moment, Woodstock seemed to return to the autumn of 1963, when for the first time, the 2 Vale children left the porch and vanished forever. The samples recovered from the 2 burial pits on the old property were rushed to the Vermont State DNA Lab. There, a team of modern molecular biologists began a process that hadn't existed nearly half a century ago, extracting DNA from bones hardened by time. In the sterile white room, technicians in latex gloves placed small bone fragments on specialized cutting tables. The steel blade scraped against the dry bone surface, tiny shards ground fine and fed into test tubes with lysis solution. The chemical smell was pungent, but no one looked away from the display screen, where genetic sequences emerged gradually, like silent traces of 2 lives buried. The process took 3 full days. The DNA extracted from the bone samples was intact enough for STR, short tandem repeat, analysis, allowing genetic structure reconstruction and comparison with living relatives. The investigation team contacted Colby Vale, Lori's eldest son, then over 50, living in Bangor, Maine. Colby was the only remaining family member with direct blood ties. When police informed him of the preliminary identification results, he fell silent for a long time, then said softly, "If it's really Tessa and JJ, at least they'll come home." Colby agreed to provide a buccal swab DNA sample. The sample was shipped via secure courier, triple sealed, arriving at the lab in just 24 hours. When his full genetic sequence was loaded into the comparison machine, numbers began appearing on the screen, each pair of genetic markers matching like puzzle pieces reunited after half a century. The results matched 99.9%. The 2 individuals exhumed from Woodstock were Tessa Vale, 16 years old, and Jacob J.J. Vale, 7 years old, missing since September 1963. The entire lab fell silent as the results printed. The small sheet, just a few lines of characters and numbers, was enough to confirm the truth. Vermont had waited 47 years for. Alongside, the team also analyzed the long light brown hair sample found in the soil layer of the second pit hair, caught in the charred fabric. Nuclear DNA was largely destroyed by heat, but mitochondrial DNA, mDNA, remained viable for comparison. The lab requested a reference sample from Lori Vale, now residing in a Portland, Maine nursing home. Under legal warrant, her hair and buccal cells were collected discreetly. When the comparison results were complete, the forensic experts confirmed the mtDNA sequence from the on-site hair matched Lori Vale's genetic profile exactly. No doubt left, her hair had adhered to the fabric wrapping the ash and soil. Evidence she was present or directly involved in the burial. McCleary received the report near midnight. He read the final line in the technical summary over and over. Source match. 100% probability. Part of him felt relief. The rest chilled. For nearly half a century, everyone believed Lori was just a mother who lost her children. But the DNA strands, inescapable traces, told a different story, that mother had been there right beside where her 2 children were buried. The next morning, McCleary brought the full forensics file to the Windsor County District Attorney's office. The brightly lit room felt heavy. He placed the folder on the desk before Prosecutor Elizabeth Crane. "It's no longer a disappearance case," he said, voice hoarse. Crane opened the documents, skimmed the results, then nodded slowly. "We have enough cause. Start the criminal reinvestigation process." The order to activate Vale file, homicide investigation, was signed that same day. The 1963 black and white photos were photocopied, attached to the brand new DNA results. From Lieutenant Benton's trembling handwriting half a century ago, missing, unresolved, now a new note was typed in sharp black ink. Confirmed homicide. Primary person of interest, Lori Vale. As McCleary left the office, Woodstock began a light rain. He paused by the window, gazing down at the old river road blurred in the water. Across, the excavation site was now fenced off, only jagged wood posts protruding from the ground. Everything was quiet, but to him, it seemed the wind whispered something, a small, thin, distant voice of the 2 children. Finally, the truth had been named right. When the Vale file was officially reopened as a homicide, the Vermont State Investigation Agency decided to form a dedicated cold case division team. The lead assigned was investigator Marcus Tanner, a seasoned former homicide detective renowned for reconstructing scenes from scant old evidence. Tanner reported to Windsor County in early May 2010, more than 47 years after the 2 Vale children vanished. On his first morning, he descended to the archive basement, where cardboard boxes stacked high, thick dust, the air thick with old paper and mildew scent. On the wooden shelf, the box labeled veiled missing, unresolved, had been pulled the previous week. But Tanner didn't stop there. He wanted to see everything related to River Road, Woodstock, 1962, 1965. Every case, report, note, even seemingly unrelated documents. If the truth was buried, he told his partner, it's sure to leave faint marks somewhere. After a few hours, Tanner discovered a sealed envelope, not in the Vale file, but in another case folder titled Day, Charles, Domestic Inquiry, 1964. The old envelope, yellowed paper, initialed by a long-ago police clerk. Inside was a handwritten letter, feminine script, folded paper, faded blue ink. At the top, signed Tamara Day, wife of Charles Day, the man mentioned in the Vale file as Lori Vale's close friend. The letter was dated November 1963, just 2 months after the disappearance. Tanner carefully unfolded it, reading the trembling lines slowly. I'm afraid for the children's safety. Lori told me the kids have been taken by the light, and she must purify to save them. She said it in a very calm voice, as if she truly believed it. I told Charles, but he told me not to get involved. I don't know what cult she's pursuing, only that it's nothing like anything in the Bible. Tanner paused, hand gripping the paper edge. A short passage, but enough to open an entirely new motive direction, delusional religious belief. He immediately photocopied the letter, sending the original to handwriting forensics for ink and paper dating verification. That afternoon, while reviewing the entire original file box contents, Tanner found a loose note clipped between two reports. The small paper, water-stained top corner with initials HB, Lieutenant Harold Benton himself, lead on the 1963 Vale case. Scrawled in black ink, witness heard truck carrying strange load, leaving River Road night of 9/11. Insufficient light to ID driver. Possible connection. Tanner tapped his pen against the paper, rereading. Truck carrying strange load at night. That could be the lead Benton intended to pursue, but the case stalled midway. Now, with forensics in hand, that detail became the perfect fit. Alexander Vale and his gray Chevrolet, the truck once suspected of hauling scrap the night of the disappearance. Tanner pulled the 1963 witness list again. Many had passed, survivors scattered across the state. Among them, he found a name, Mrs. Eliza Croft, part-time housekeeper for the Vale family in the final months before the case. Eliza, then in her early 20s, now a 70-year-old woman in Montpelier. When Tanner knocked on her small apartment door, it took her minutes to recognize Vale. Then she shuddered slightly, sat in her chair, voice trembling. That night, I'll never forget it. Eliza recounted that on the evening before the children vanished, she had gone to the Vale house for afternoon cleaning. Lori acted strangely, quiet, staring out the window toward the woods, occasionally whispering as if praying. She said there was darknesses around the house, and only she could drive it away. Eliza left the Vale house around 9 p.m. As she stepped onto the road, she heard a low argument between Lori and Alexander, the man's voice angry. Late into the night, half asleep, she heard through her boarding house window a truck engine rumbling from the River Road direction. Then, silence. The next morning, I heard the kids were gone. Those recollections, though not direct evidence, chilled Tanner. He returned to the office, spreading everything on the table. Tamara Day's letter, the light purification belief. Benton's note on the truck with strange load, Eliza's account of the argument night and departing truck. The scattered pieces gradually connected, forming a clear picture. Lori Vale hadn't acted in panic or to cover an accident. She believed she was freeing her children from what she called darkness. The kill to conceal and exorcism motives now merged, a mother out of control, believing her children possessed, aided by her brother and lover, to purify souls. Tanner noted that thought in his personal journal, not as conclusion, but as warning. Because he knew crimes with religious motives always carried an extra layer of danger, the perpetrator often believed themselves innocent. Outside, dusk fell over Windsor County, the last sunlight piercing the dusty basement storage window. Tanner packed the papers, carefully refolding Tamara Day's letter. In that dim light, he felt he saw clearer than ever, not just what Lori Vale had done, but how she convinced herself it was right. And that absolute conviction was the root of the half-century tragedy. In the Windsor County Task Force office, the white walls now covered in sticky notes, diagrams, and photos. Center was the large board Marcus Tanner called the belief map, where he was trying to reconstruct the complex relationships among the three central names in the case: Lori Vale, Alexander Vale, and Charles Day. Red string threads connected from Lori's central photo in two directions, one to Alexander, the close brother, and the other to Charles Day, the close friend, also lover, who lived near the Vales the year of the crime. Tanner stood before the board, marker in hand, speaking slowly to his partner. We're facing two layers of motive, one spiritual, two financial. They complement each other, not exclude. First motive, delusional religious belief. From Tamara Day's letter, Tanner pieced together Lori's psychological portrait in the months before the tragedy. After her husband's death, Lori was deeply influenced by Charles's purification prayer sessions in small groups, where they believed the world was nearing Judgment Day and only pure souls would be saved. Lori, already fragile and devout, was drawn into that twisted theology. She believed darkness possessed her children, that Tessa and JJ were no longer themselves. In Lori's diary, found in seized files from Maine, she wrote, "The light in them has faded. If I don't act, they'll never rest." Tanner highlighted purification in red ink, He said, "This isn't just religion, but personal fanatic superstition," and Charles Day nurtured it. In the 1960s, Vermont had many unregulated small religious communities operating freely. Tanner believed Charles, a self-proclaimed spiritual teacher, planted in Lori the conviction she had a mission to free souls for her children. Alexander, the conservative brother, initially opposed but later drawn in, becoming the protector for his sister in the purification journey. Second motive, financial. A colder link emerged when Tanner reviewed 1963 Burlington bank records. In Vermont State Bank archives, he found transaction copies on September 18, 1963. Just 1 week after the children vanished, Lori Vale withdrew the full life insurance payout from her husband, $8,000, a large sum then. Documents also showed that same day, she transferred part of the money to Charles Day's account under religious publishing investment. 3 months later, that account was drained, and Charles left Vermont, abandoning only the plot where ash and bones were later found. Tanner stared at the numbers, shuddering. "Religion can blind people," he said. "But money's always the simplest explanation." Perhaps initially, Lori truly believed she saved her children's souls, but later, when the insurance required proof of disappearance without body recovery, Alexander and Charles helped legitimize the story. They needed the children gone for the money to flow. What was found in Alexander's old garage, polychloroprene adhesive, machine oil, lidded gasoline traces, now took clear meaning. Alexander, with mechanic skills, had the tools and knowledge to help Lori process bodies and erase traces. Charles provided the sacred rationale so they could do it without feeling criminal. One for money, one for faith. Tanner wrote on the board, "Dual motive, delusional religious belief plus insurance profiteering." When that belief system collapsed, after Charles Day left Vermont and Alexander died suddenly in 1965, Lori carried the guilt and fear for nearly half a century. She left, lived in isolation, never mentioning the disappearance. But that silence didn't erase what she'd done. Tanner closed the file, standing silent before the board. In the dim office light, the three names Lori, Charles, Alexander linked by red thread, formed a distorted triangle: belief, power, and money. He whispered, almost to himself, 3 people, 3 reasons, 1 crime. The summary sent that day had only 4 lines. Lori Vale, mastermind. Believed killing her children was soul purification. Alexander Vale, accomplice. Assisted transport. Disposal, possibly the hands-on actor. Charles Day, indirect accomplice. Incited, directed, and received financial benefit. Composite motive. Religious fanaticism, plus insurance fraud. Night fell, and Tanner sat alone in the office. The yellow light reflecting off the board still stuck with sticky notes. He knew he had touched the core of the case, no longer the story of 2 missing children, but the tragedy of twisted belief and greed, justified by prayer. In the silence, Tanner removed his glasses and said softly, "Now it's clear who the killer is, and what made them kill, what they called faith." In June 2010, after nearly 3 months of reinvestigation, the official arrest warrant was signed by the Windsor County District Judge. The name on the warrant was Lori Ann Vale, 74 years old, charged with first-degree murder and concealment of bodies. After nearly half a century, the woman once seen as the poor mother who lost her children now became the prime suspect in the murder of her own children. The investigation team coordinated with Portland, Maine police, where Lori was living in a quiet nursing home near the sea. Her room was small, walls hung with faded family photos. Center was a portrait of Lori with her 3 children, taken in the summer of 1962, just 1 year before everything dissolved. The white-haired, frail woman still retained a gentle demeanor, but in her eyes was something cloudy, like a fog of memory covering it. That morning, Marcus Tanner and 2 Maine officers entered the room. He spoke softly, almost like delivering news. "Miss Vale, we have a warrant for your arrest, in connection with the deaths of Tessa and Jacob Vale." Lori raised her head slowly. For a moment, confusion crossed her face, but it was quickly replaced by an eerie calm. "You're too late," she replied, her voice hoarse. "It's all over long ago." Lori didn't resist when handcuffed. She put on a thin wool sweater, old house slippers with worn heels. The nurses in the home stood still in the hallway, watching as the police escorted her out. Outside, Portland's sky was misty, the sea wind carrying a salty chill. At 74, Lori's steps were still steady, only her gaze distant, drifting along the tree line, as if searching for something lost long ago. At the Portland Police Department holding cell, Tanner sat across from her. In front of him was a small evidence bag, a few photos, an old letter, and the 1963 life insurance file, all seized from Lori's room that morning. In the nightstand drawer, police also found a small folded scrap of paper, written in trembling handwriting. "I still hear them laughing in the wind." Tanner placed the paper on the table, looking straight at her. "You've kept this for how many years?" Lori closed her eyes, breathing deeply. "I just wanted to remember. They're here around me, never gone." "Do you know what we found in Woodstock?" Tanner asked. She was silent. He pulled out the photo of the necklace engraved TV and the small bracelet engraved JJ, placing them before her. In that brief moment, Lori's lips trembled slightly, but she didn't cry. "I've paid with memories," she said, her voice calmly terrifying. "I hear them every night. No one needs to punish me anymore." Tanner looked at her for a long time. He knew such words often came from those who believed themselves not guilty, but fulfilling a mission. Lori's calm wasn't remorse, but acceptance, as if she believed everything had happened according to God's will. "Do you want to say anything?" he asked one last time. Lori turned to look through the small window, where dim light fell on the wall. "No," she whispered. "If I speak, you won't understand." She was transferred that night to the Vermont State Holding Facility, by specialized vehicle driving 6 hours from Portland to Windsor County. When the car stopped in front of the county jail, thick fog covered the yard, yellow lights casting on the steel fence. Tanner stood by the car door, watching the woman step down, hands still cuffed in front. Though elderly, Lori held her posture straight, head slightly raised. In that moment, Tanner suddenly thought she wasn't afraid of arrest, she was afraid of being forgotten. As the jail door slammed shut behind her, the metallic echo resounding down the hall, Tanner silently folded the file. He knew this wasn't the end. Lori Vale might stay silent, but evidence doesn't lie. And when all pieces fit, Vermont would have to hear that story again, for the last time, from the very sin this mother had tried to bury with her 2 children for nearly half a century. In the early days of July 2010, the Windsor County Police Office conducted a series of 5 official interrogations of Lori Vale. Each session took place in a small room, white-painted concrete walls, a metal table, 2 facing chairs, and a cold fluorescent light hanging right in the center of the ceiling. Lori sat there, back straight, hands lightly placed on the table. Though 74, she exuded an unusual calm, no resistance, no fear, only brief answers, sometimes silence. In the first session, investigator Marcus Tanner only spoke of the past life in Woodstock, the 2 children, Alexander and Charles Day. Lori answered each question, voice even. "My brother always took care of me," she said. "Charles taught me to pray. They were good people." When Tanner mentioned finding the silver necklace and bracelet engraved with names, she just nodded slightly. "I knew they were there." That statement silenced the room. But when Tanner asked, "How did you know?" she only replied, "A mother always knows." In the second session, Tanner presented the DNA evidence, the matching results from Lori's hair found in the buried fabric with ash and soil. When the sample photo was placed on the table, Lori stared at it for a long time. No more evasive gaze as before, only weariness and a momentary daze. "My hair?" she asked. Tanner nodded. "You were there, Lori. We can prove it." Lori bowed her head, lips moving as if to say something but swallowing it. After minutes, she said softly, If you prove I was there, it means I didn't abandon them. That statement wasn't a confession, but the first crack in the wall of silence. By the third session, Tanner changed tactics. He didn't ask about the charges, but recalled the past, the autumn of 1963, the last morning when Tessa and JJ were alive. He recounted scene details as if he had stood in that house himself. JJ's milk glass still on the table. Back door open. Sunlight through the white curtains. Lori closed her eyes. When Tanner mentioned the red scarf caught on the branch and the truck tire tracks, her hands clenched. He placed before her the black and white photo of the excavated TV necklace. Tears suddenly rolled down Lori's cheek, the first tears throughout the investigation. Tessa loved that necklace, she said. Voice trembling. I gave it to her because she was afraid of the dark. Tanner sat still, waiting. She looked up, eyes cloudy. I didn't want them to hurt. The fourth session lasted the entire morning. Tanner and prosecutor Elizabeth Crane attended together. They sequentially showed Lori each piece of evidence. Charred fabric, soil samples, iron shell, and the GPR radar map showing the 2 burial pits discovered on Charles Day's property. Lori was silent for nearly an hour, until the color-printed map was placed right before her. Where is this, Miss Vale? Tanner asked. Lori looked for a long time, trembling finger placing on the red-marked area near the old barn foundation. Here, she said softly. Behind the old barn, near the maple root. Tanner held his breath. You went there? She nodded. That night was cold. I heard Alex's truck. Charles stood at the door. I wrapped them in blankets. Alex said everything will be quiet. I didn't ask more. Her voice trailed off, weary. I just remember the gasoline sound, smoke smell, then silence. After nearly half a century, Lori Vale admitted for the first time, I know where they lie. The fifth session, held 2 days later, was no longer interrogation, but memory reconstruction. Tanner took Lori from the jail to Woodstock, under tight state police supervision. The car slowly rolled along the old river road, now covered in maple leaves. Lori looked out the window, saying nothing the whole way. When the car stopped at the plot that was once Charles Day's home, now just rotted wooden fence and tall grass, she said softly, I still hear them here. They led her to the excavation area. Tanner opened the GPR map, asking gently, Can you show me the exact place? Lori looked around, gaze lost in the damp ground, then slowly stepped a few paces, stopping at the position matching exactly the second pit the radar had scanned. Right here, she said. Alex told me not to come back, but I did, later. Everyone around stood silent. Tanner asked softly, Why, Lori? She bowed her head. Charles said they weren't themselves anymore, that their souls had gone, only empty shells left. I just wanted them at peace. I didn't think I killed them. Her voice grew hoarse, then faded. As they led her back to the car, Woodstock began a light rain. Lori leaned her head against the window, sunken eyes watching the old maple trees recede behind. To Tanner, that interrogation wasn't just a confession, it was the final confirmation. Lori's words, the position she pointed, every detail about the tree root, barn, pit, all matched exactly with GPR data and excavation site. 3 days after Lori Vale gave her final statement, the Windsor County investigation team returned to the Woodstock plot for supplemental digging at the scene. The July morning was chilly, dew still on the grass, and the sky overcast gray, as if Vermont itself held its breath. This time, police weren't searching for new clues. They went to verify the words of the woman who had kept the secret for nearly half a century. Marcus Tanner was there early, with the forensics team led by Dr. Caroline Hurst. Based on the GPR map and Lori's precise pointing in the fifth interrogation, they marked the area about 3 meters from the initial excavation pit, right beside an old maple root. The soil there was dark, mixed with much ash, roots tangled intricately. When the first layer of earth was scooped up, the smell of old gasoline and burned smoke rose sharply, acrid and metallic to the point of suffocating. At nearly 1.5 meters deep, the shovel blade hit metal. A technician brushed the dirt away by hand, revealing a heavy rusted iron can. It was deformed, lid half-blown, inside still some fine black charcoal powder. On the surface, faint engraving of Sinclair, a popular Vermont gasoline brand in the early 1960s. Caroline Hurst examined closely, then nodded. Traces of a real gasoline can. It was used as a small burn barrel. A few inches away, the forensics team discovered a small leather shoe, rubber sole rotted, laces charred, plastic smell still lingering. This shoe sample matched the other shoe found in 1963 by the Otokoche Lake shore. A detail now completing the picture, one swept away by the current, the other buried with the ash remnants. Beside the pit, metal glinted, revealing a flower-shaped barrette, rusted but still intact. Tanner gently picked it up, his hand trembling slightly. "Tessa wore this style in her 1962 birthday photo," he said, voice choking. Each item was packaged separately, photographed, and sealed per modern protocol. But what silenced the entire team was the absolute match between Lori's statement and reality. She had pointed exactly to the gasoline can location, ash pit position, and spoken of the barrette falling from her hair when I knelt down. That seemingly vague statement now verified by the artifact deep in the earth. In the Montpelier lab, the samples were quickly analyzed. The remaining ash in the iron can was separated via electron microscope. Results showed heavy hydrocarbon traces, typical of leaded gasoline, the fuel commonly used at Vermont stations in the early 1960s, especially Sinclair Oil Corporation. Additionally, soil around the pit had lead and benzene levels 7 times higher than natural soil, proving an industrial gasoline burning process, not forest fire or spontaneous. Fabric burn analysis also yielded consistent results. Synthetic fibers in the fabric decomposed at about 500–600 degrees Celsius. Exact to gasoline poured directly on small objects. Caroline Hurst wrote in the internal memo, "No doubt, this was intentional burning to destroy biological evidence and disfigure bodies before burial." Tanner arrived at the forensics lab that afternoon for the verbal report. As Caroline presented the samples, he looked at the magnified photos, rusted iron can, charred fibers, microscopic bone fragments, still stuck with gasoline residue. Each image, like a slice of a ruthlessly calculated crime. "Everything matches her statement perfectly," she said. "Location, material, dating. Can't be coincidence," Tanner nodded. "So she wasn't lying," he replied softly. "But she never thought she committed a crime." Caroline looked at him, eyes stern. "A person can kill for many reasons, Marcus. But only someone who believes they're right can be calm enough to bury their children so neatly." The supplemental forensics results were compiled into a report, over 50 pages thick, with dozens of chemical comparison images. In the summary sent to Prosecutor Elizabeth Crane, Tanner wrote, "Third scene, ash pit pointed out by suspect, shows intentional body burning using 1960s leaded gasoline fuel. Artifacts, iron can, barrette, child shoe, match exactly with statement and GPR results. This is scientific evidence bolstering murder and body concealment charges." That evening, Tanner drove back to Woodstock, stopping by the Otokoche riverbank. The wind carried scents of damp grass and old smoke, evoking the soil smell at the burial pit that morning. He thought of the 2 children who once ran on the white wooden porch, laughed in the photo Lori kept by her bed for half a century. Now the evidence left no room for doubt. They had been killed, burned, then buried in silence. On the way back, Tanner rolled down the window, letting the night wind rush in. He didn't say it aloud, but in his heart silently thanked science, the only thing that could shatter the ash of time and bring justice back from the earth. The bone fragments, gasoline streaks, and a rusted barrette all had spoken for the small souls forgotten. And for the first time since 1963, the truth no longer lay underground, it had been pulled into the light. In the fall of 2011, nearly a year after Lori Vale's arrest, the Vale case trial officially opened at the Windsor County Courthouse in Vermont. Outside, early season fog blanketed Main Street in Montpelier, groups of locals gathering at the courthouse gates from early morning, mostly elderly, those who grew up with the two Woodstock missing children story. Inside, the old courtroom renovated, oak-paneled walls, dim golden light falling on the wooden benches. In the front row, the 12-person jury sat upright, while Lori Vale, 75, sat at the defense table, silver hair cropped short, gaunt face expressionless. When the judge read the case name, she looked up, cloudy eyes toward the old wall clock, where the second hand still ticked slowly, as if time rewound to 1963. Prosecutor Elizabeth Crane stood to open the presentation. She didn't use tragic or dramatic words, but chose to start with facts. Your Honor, the evidence in this case doesn't come from rumors, but from the earth. The earth doesn't lie. Her voice steady, resolute, Crane sequentially presented the evidence gathered throughout the reinvestigation. DNA from victim bones, Lori's hair sample matching in the buried fabric, excavated artifacts, the TV necklace, JJ bracelet, gasoline can, beret, child's shoe, along with Tamara Day's letter, Lieutenant Benton's 1963 note, and Burlington bank records showing Lori withdrawing the full insurance sum right after the children vanished. Each piece projected on the large screen, the courtroom silent, except for the projector's hum. Crane continued, voice unchanging. No blood, no direct witnesses, but an irrefutable chain of physical logic, motor oil traces, gasoline-mixed soil, burned objects, and the defendant's own pointing, matching exactly with GPR results. There's no way to know that location unless the person was there. She paused, turning her gaze to the jury. We don't need to talk emotions, we just need to talk facts. A mother was at the scene, buried her two children, and stayed silent for 47 years. That's not accident, not lost. That's intentional action. The next image was Tamara Day's letter, where she wrote of her fear before Lori's words about light purifying souls. Crane read slowly, each word cutting into the silence. She told me the kids had been taken by the light, and she had to free them. Crane folded the letter saying, we have delusional religious motive, but also financial motive. Bank evidence confirms, after the disappearance, the defendant received the full husband insurance payout and transferred to Charles Day. That's planned behavior. At the defense table, attorney Arthur Langley, a middle-aged man renowned for defending elderly defendants, stood. He didn't refute scientific evidence, instead he focused on the time factor. Your Honor, he said, voice calmly deep, we're trying a nearly 80-year-old woman, based on faded memories and indirect evidence from half a century ago. No one can remember exactly what happened in 1963. Forensic facts can't tell the story of the human mind. He turned to the jury. They say she pointed out the burial site. But how many in Woodstock knew that land was once Charles Day's? How many heard rumors over decades? Can an elderly person's memory be trusted when led by questions and images? Are you certain this is truth, or remnants of recreated accusations? Langley paused, hand on Lori's shoulder. Miss Vale lost everything. Husband, children, life. If her sin was wrong belief, that belief punished her for half a century. Today you don't just judge actions, but memories. He ended with a statement silencing the courtroom. Sometimes truth comes too late to still call it justice. That afternoon, the prosecution replied succinctly. We don't try memories, we try physics. Defendant's hair at the scene. Her children's DNA in the pit. 1960s gasoline traces in the iron can. Money withdrawn right after they vanished. All speak the same language. And that language doesn't fade with time. On the 8th day of trial, the jury retired to deliberate. Outside, autumn wind blew through the maple row, leaves drifting before the courthouse steps. Lori Vale sat still, hands clasped, gaze distant as if looking through the wooden wall. Beside her, Marcus Tanner, the man who followed the case from the day it reopened, stood silent in the spectator row. He felt no joy, only weariness. The 12 took over 5 hours to decide. When they returned, the courtroom held its breath. The judge called for order. The jury foreman, a silver-haired man, held the paper and read aloud, "We, the jury of the state of Vermont, after considering all evidence, find the defendant Lori Ann Vale guilty of first-degree murder of Tessa Vale and Jacob Vale." No sound rose after that. Lori remained seated, eyes open but vacant. The jury continued the verdict. Sentence, life imprisonment without parole. The judge nodded, voice deep resounding in the thick air. "Miss Vale, you stayed silent for nearly half a century, but Vermont's justice never stays silent. This trial doesn't just close the Vale case, but ends a dark chapter of Woodstock history. Do you wish to say anything before the court issues the final sentence?" Lori raised her head, her cloudy eyes seeming to look through everyone. She said softly, "I hear them laughing every time the wind blows through the door. If that's a sin, then I've lived in prison for a long time." The statement weighed heavily on the entire courtroom. No one knew if it was a confession or a final form of self-reassurance. The judge didn't respond, just signaled the bailiff to escort her away. As Lori stood, her legs trembled slightly, but her face still held that terrifying calm. She walked slowly past the rows of seats, the yellow light casting on her gaunt cheekbones. Not a single tear, not a single glance back. Outside, cold wind blew strongly, maple leaves flying past the windows. Tanner watched her figure gradually disappear behind the iron jail door. In his mind echoed the words of Lieutenant Benton from years ago, that he had once read in an old note, "Sometimes the perpetrator doesn't flee, they just grow old with their sins." As the door closed, everyone in the courtroom still stood still. The Vale case, once forgotten in the moldy files of the 1960s, now officially closed, no longer a legend, but a truth proven by science, by a belated confession, and by relics rising from the cold earth. Lori Vale was taken from the courthouse in a gray prison van. Through the small window, the sunset bathed the Woodstock forest, where the two children once played. She looked out there, no one knowing what that gaze carried, regret, fear, or just emptiness. At 75, Lori's life ended right where it had shattered, and for Vermont, that afternoon marked the end of the 47-year disappearance. A tragedy where, though late, justice still found its way back. News of Lori Vale's verdict spread across Vermont overnight. The next morning, the Burlington Free Press ran a massive front-page headline, "Vermont 1963 Cold Case Solved. Mother Convicted After 47 Years." Below the headline was a black-and-white photo of the wooden house on River Road, now just a foundation and a tilted "Do Not Trespass" sign. The small caption underneath read, "The mother once praised for her resilience in overcoming tragedy, now sentenced to life for that very crime." Woodstock was stunned. In the small cafes along the streets, people whispered about the trial, about the silver-haired woman who had once been an active member of the local church, teaching Bible to children, volunteering after her husband's death. She had been seen as Vermont's most enduring mother, a symbol of pain but fortitude. Now, with the truth exposed, the town's memories seemed shaken. "I used to bring food to her after the disappearance," an old neighbor said through tears. No one thought Lori could do that. No one. The older folks recalled 1963, the cold, long autumn when hundreds scoured the maple woods for the two Vale children. They spoke of the smoke smell, of flashlights sweeping through the fog, and now, hearing about the body burning, they shuddered. "We might have walked right over that spot without knowing." The whispered stories returned like old ghosts, giving Woodstock an atmosphere of both pity and bewilderment, as if the whole community had lived with a lie for nearly half a century. Local TV stations quickly revived archives. On Vermont Public Broadcasting, a special program aired titled "The Vale Case," Vermont's oldest solved cold case. The host read excerpts from Lieutenant Harold Benton's journal, showed old photos, the muddy scene, the TV necklace, the gray Chevrolet truck. The commentator's voice was somber. The Vale case became Vermont's longest cold case in state history. and the first solved through combining genetic data with witness confessions after nearly half a century. National media also took interest. The New York Times published a long article calling it a symbol of enduring justice and praising the Windsor County team for turning modern technology into a bridge between two investigative eras. However, the article also posed a question: can society accept the truth when the killer is a mother? Amid the wave of information, a quiet memorial ceremony was held at the Woodstock Cemetery on October 21st. Two new headstones were erected side by side, simply engraved Tessa Vale, 1947, 1963 Jacob J.J. Vale, 1956, 1963. On the stone was only a small line, "Finally home." The ceremony included Colby Vale, the eldest son now over 50, along with a few Woodstock residents who had joined the 1963 search. No elaborate flowers, just a few bunches of wild daisies and small maple saplings planted around the graves. As the autumn wind blew, red maple leaves drifted over the stones, the wind mingling with the distant church bells. Colby stood silent for a long time, then said softly to the press, "I'm no longer angry at Mom. She's no longer the person from that reality. But at least, Tessa and JJ have been called by their right names, laid in the earth as children who should have been loved." After the case, Vermont state authorities issued a new policy called the Cold Case Re-Examination Act, a law requiring review of all pre-1980 missing persons files, combining modern DNA forensics and geological mapping. The Vale case became a model lesson in forensics, GPR detection, multi-generational genetic matching, and use of old bank data, all incorporated into police training curricula. Before, cases like this would sleep forever, Marcus Tanner said in a short interview. Now, there's no such thing as time secrets, just evidence not yet seen. In the community, the shock gradually gave way to a strange sense of relief. Woodstock residents began bringing flowers to the old Vale property site, now a small memorial set up by the town. A wooden plaque engraved dedicated to the memory of Tessa and Jacob Vale, gone but not forgotten. Every autumn, Woodstock Union High School teachers brought students there, telling the story of the 1963 disappearance, not to instill fear but to remind that justice can come late, but it always finds its way home. Marcus Tanner, after the case closed, refused all major interviews. He left the agency, retiring to a small farm near Burlington. People say he still occasionally drives along River Road, stopping where the white wooden Vale family house once stood. One early winter afternoon, someone saw him standing for a long time by the maple row, gazing down at the snow-covered ground. When asked what he thought, Tanner said only one sentence: "In Vermont, the snow melts and the truth rises from the earth." And then he fell silent, letting that statement end it all. For after 47 years, what was buried had been unearthed. The lost souls had found rest. And justice, though late, had come, carrying Vermont's characteristic chill, but warm enough to thaw the memories of a community that had slept in darkness. The Woodstock, Vermont 1963 story reminds us, in today's American life, that community safety relies on vigilance, science, and the courage to speak truth, even when it hurts. Two very small artifacts, Tessa's TV necklace, JJ's JJ bracelet, opened the path to truth. When paired with modern technology, GPR detected the burial pits, STR and mtDNA confirmed identities, then Lori's hair in the charred fabric linked the mother to the scene. Practical lessons. 1. Report disappearances immediately. Don't believe wait 24 hours. The initial delay at the Vale home made the 7:30–10 a.m. gap irreparable. 2. Don't tamper with the scene. The hasty cleanup in the kitchen erased valuable traces. 3. Preserve dental records, photos, children's items. The Woodstock Clinic dental files enabled the match after 47 years. 4. Be wary of salvation beliefs twisted and pressure from family religious communities. Lori's purification rhetoric, Charles Day's influence, and Alexander's technical support show violence, sometimes disguised as morality. 5. Finance can be a parallel motive. Withdrawing insurance right after the disappearance was a red flag. For families and schools, use hotlines, establish safety plans, check child welfare, and learn evidence preservation steps. For communities, support cold case budgets, donate genealogical DNA voluntarily with informed consent, including privacy rights, and document unusual observations. The late-night truck noise was once a key puzzle piece. Justice may come late, but only when we persist in holding facts, memories, and each other safe. Thank you for following the story to the end, where justice, though buried nearly half a century, was finally found in the cold heart of Vermont. If you believe truth always finds a way to rise from the darkness, subscribe to the channel to join us in exploring other cases forgotten by time. See you in the next video.